Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today for the podcast uh, on lithium. And this is a topic of great interest. I've heard from colleagues who follow the podcast. Some of them expressed concerns about using lithium. So I thought I'd do an episode on it. What I hear from clinicians, psychiatrists, but especially nurse practitioners, is that they don't feel comfortable sometimes using lithium. They may even be afraid of it, so they don't give it. So here's my message to you. It's a variation on something that I was taught by my closest mentor over the years, Dr. Frederick Goodwin, who was an expert in manic depressive illness, wrote the main textbook on it, former director of the NIMH. When Fred Goodwin used to give lectures, that if you can't or won't use lithium, you should get out of the business of treating bipolar illness. If you can't or won't use lithium, you should get out of the business of treating bipolar illness. I would expand that and say, if you can't or won't use lithium, you should get out of the business of treating anyone in psychiatry. You should get out of the business of treating any psychiatric conditions, because lithium is not limited to bipolar illness and its benefits, and it should be used much more extensively. Just yesterday, I got an email from someone who's been communicating with me about potentially clinical consultation. And she said that having heard about my general advice, she started lithium a month ago, and all of her depression and anxiety went away. After years and years of being on serotonin reuptake inhibitors, benzodiazepines, etc., once she started lithium, all of her depression and anxiety went away. Now, you don't think usually of lithium for depression and anxiety. You think of it for bipolar illness, perhaps. But I want you to start thinking about it for depression and anxiety. And the reason is the depression and anxiety that you're diagnosing and treating as so-called major depressive disorder or so-called generalized anxiety disorder is not those things. Those things are meaningless and invalid. In fact, it often represents mood temperaments like cyclothymia or hyperthymia, or depression as part of manic depressive illness that's not officially bipolar illness. And those conditions respond to lithium, low dose lithium often. So here's the other thing I want to emphasize. Besides saying you should use lithium in general, not just for bipolar, but depression and anxiety, the way you can get comfortable, the way you can lose the idea that you're uncomfortable using lithium is to give low doses. Give 300 milligrams to start. Leave it there. Leave it there for a month, 2 months, 3 months. The patient who started lithium last month didn't start at 300 and go to 900. She just took 300. So start at 300. Often that's all you need. If you need to go up after a few weeks or a month or two, go to 450 milligrams. Leave it there for a few weeks, a month or two. If you need to go up, go to 600 milligrams. These are still about half the usual doses that people give of lithium or less. And the blood levels will be low, subtherapeutic. Actually, they're not low and subtherapeutic. They're quite therapeutic. The blood levels for lithium are not necessary to follow and to get to 0.8 and the levels you hear about all the time to get benefits. That's a third common misconception. So besides using lithium and using it in low doses, the third teaching is forget about the blood level. Don't worry about the blood level. You don't need to get it to a standard therapeutic blood level. Just treat the patient with lithium like you treat patients with any other drug. You dose it to clinical effect. And the clinical effect will be beneficial at low doses if you just wait, if you don't constantly give lithium at high doses. So low dose lithium, 300 milligrams to 600 milligrams a day, that's the range. The blood level will be somewhere between 0.2 to 0.5. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. What matters is the patient getting better or not? And wherever the patient gets better, that's where you stop. If it's 300, first dose, stop it right there. If it's 450, stop it there. Patient's better, they don't need to go up on the dose. Leave them on that. 600 milligrams, that's fine. Now, you will have some people who will not get better at these low doses of lithium. And from 600, take them to 750. Don't jump to 900. A lot of people get well at 750 at a blood level of 0.6. And if they need 900 milligrams a day of lithium, full dose, blood level 0.8, okay, that's fine. But you don't need to be doing that routinely. That's a minority of people. Now you're going to say, oh, but the kidney risks and so on. 1 to 5% in 20 years of treatment at full doses is the risk for chronic renal insufficiency. Let me repeat that. 1 to 5% at 20 years of treatment at full doses. If you give half the standard dose or low doses, it's going to be 1 to 5% at 40 years, or it'll be less than 1% at 20 years. 95 to 99% of people, therefore, do not get chronic kidney problems with lithium at 20 years of treatment. 95 to 99% are fine. So there isn't kidney risk in the vast majority of people. Even with that, if you dose it once a day, the risk is even lower. That 1 to 5% is the risk with current practice, where people are giving high doses of lithium when they don't need to, and they're usually dosing it 2 or 3 times a day, which they shouldn't. The half-life of lithium is 24 hours a day. It's 24 hours, so you only need to give it once a day. There's good research that shows that if you give lithium once a day, there's less long-term chronic kidney problems. So if you give lithium once a day and you give it at lower doses, it's less than 1 to 5% risk at longer than 20 years of treatment. In other words, the vast majority of your patients are going to have no kidney problems with lithium if you dose it correctly the way I've just described. What about thyroid effects? That happens more frequently, maybe 5 to 10% of people, or maybe a little more. It happens sooner, maybe on the order of months to years, but it's reversible and treatable. Stop the lithium, goes away. Gives thyroid hormone, you make it better. So that's not a long-term problem either, or not a reason not to give lithium. Even the 1 to 5% at 20 years or longer of chronic renal insufficiency with lithium, you are testing blood levels once a year. When you start seeing it go up too high, you could always stop it and patients will be fine. So none of these are reasons to not give lithium for a month or 2 months or 3 months. None of these are reasons not to give lithium at all, to not even try it. I always tell patients, look, 95 to 90%, 99% likelihood for 20 years, you won't have a problem. But we're not talking about 20 years. We're talking about try it now for the next few months. Let's see if you get better. If you don't, stop it. There's no reason not to use lithium. So give it a pragmatic trial and see if people get better, and you will see they'll get better. If you can't or won't use lithium in psychiatry, get out of the business. Give it at low doses, 300 to 600 milligrams. Go up slowly. Don't worry about the blood level. And don't worry about the kidney impairment, because it's 1 to 5% at 20 years or less. Give it once a day and you'll be fine. That's how you use lithium. Now, if you do this, you will find that many of your patients will get better. Your patients will not need multiple serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They will not need one dopamine blocker after the other. And they will not need anticonvulsants. They will not need all those benzodiazepines. They certainly won't need all those amphetamines. You're treating the effects when you use those drugs, not the causes. The cause often is a mood illness that's highly treatable with lithium. The effects is when your mood is up and down, you can't concentrate, you can't sleep, you're anxious, and then you diagnose all these other things and give all these other symptomatic drugs for them. But if you treat the cause, those effects won't happen. So patients will get better with fewer medications at low doses. In my clinical experience, and this is what I would predict for you as clinicians if you give lithium to your patients, I would say that about 1/2 of all your patients will get better on low dose lithium. And you won't need to use SRIs and dopamine blockers and maybe a little bit of benzodiazepine, but not much else. Or that 1/2 will get a lot better, and then all you have to give is a little bit of a dopamine blocker or a little bit of a benzodiazepine here and there to cover the rest of their symptoms. Try it. Make lithium the cornerstone of your treatment, and you'll find you won't need to use much of the other medications. In my practice, easily 1/2 or more of my patients are on lithium. It's by far the drug I use the most. And I think I want to emphasize this other point. In general, in psychiatry, lithium is by far the most effective drug. By far. It's the only drug that's been proven to prevent suicide in psychiatry. No other drug has. Clozapine has some data. You're thinking, yes, it's one study. Lithium has multiple studies. And the clozapine study showed reduction in suicide attempts, the randomized trial, not actually completed suicide. Lithium is the only drug that has randomized data that shows that it prevents completed suicides. As you may know, recently, got a lot of media attention, Lithium also has pretty good evidence that it probably prevents dementia. It's neuroprotective. None of the other drugs have been shown to prevent dementia. You're going to say there's this study and that study that shows that SRIs or dopamine blockers are neuroprotective. Yeah, but there's also studies that show that they're not. Those studies often are in animals, not in humans, and they have not been shown in humans to prevent dementia. Lithium has. Lithium is the only drug among all of our drugs that has some decent data that it prevents dementia in humans, and the only drug that prevents suicide. Interestingly, it does this at very, very low doses in some studies. When there are studies of lithium in the drinking water, for instance, because lithium is a natural mineral, equivalent doses of about 1 milligram of elemental lithium, maybe a little more. That's equivalent to about 5 milligrams of lithium carbonate, not 300, not 600, 5 milligrams of lithium carbonate, reduces the suicide rates compared to places where there's zero lithium by 1/2, 50% reduction in suicide rates with 1 milligram of elemental lithium. There's also some data from Scandinavia showing similar tiny doses of lithium in the diet reduces dementia rates. So there's no excuse not to take lithium. Another teaching point, there is no minimum effective dose of lithium. There is no minimum effective dose of lithium. You get benefit with lithium at whatever dose. You can keep going down, you'll still get some benefit. If you can't take 300 milligrams of lithium carbonate, take 150 milligrams of lithium carbonate. If you can't take 150 milligrams of lithium carbonate, take 75. Everybody in the world can take, by the way, that kind of dose unless they have some kind of immune system disease. You can take lithium orotate over the counter, buy it on Amazon. And the dose is 5 milligrams of elemental lithium, which is equivalent to 25 milligrams of lithium carbonate. You can get up to 10 to 20 milligrams of elemental lithium over the counter, which is equivalent to about 50 to 100 milligrams of lithium carbonate. So if you can't take lithium carbonate at 150 milligrams or above, you can take over-the-counter lithium orotate at 5 to 20 milligrams. And you can tolerate that. 5 milligrams of elemental lithium over the counter is tolerable in general for almost everyone. Now you're going to say, what about all the other side effects, the diarrhea, the cognitive side effects, etc.? At 300 to 600 milligrams of lithium carbonate, those side effects just don't happen. The majority of my patients have zero side effects at 300 to 600 milligrams of lithium. There is a very small minority who will get diarrhea. That's the most common thing I see. And there will be some increased urination, though that's usually not a problem. But it's very mild or practically none for most people at those doses. There might be a few people that are just sensitive to it and they get diarrhea at lithium at 300 milligrams, so maybe they can't take it. But again, if you're using it for suicide prevention potentially or neuroprotection, even those patients can take 5 milligrams of lithium orotate over the counter and they're not going to get diarrhea from that. And there's not going to be kidney impairment from that. 1 to 5% at 20 years of treatment at 900 milligrams of lithium carbonate, which is equivalent to over 100 milligrams of elemental lithium. So if you're just giving 1 or 5 milligrams of elemental lithium, you don't have any of that risk. It's minuscule. So there's no excuse for someone not to take a little bit of lithium, a tiny amount over the counter. At least everybody can take that. But lower doses of prescription lithium, even that, the vast majority of people can take it. So in terms of side effects and risks and harms, there's no reason not to give lithium. And in terms of benefits, the benefits are massive, more than other drugs. And I'll make a point about benefits for mood episodes. Everyone thinks of lithium's for mania. No, it's actually just as proven, if not better proven, for treatment of depression than for mania. In bipolar illness, lithium has been better proven to prevent, has more evidence, more of an effect size for prevention of depressive episodes than for manic episodes. So it prevents depressive episodes equally or better than it prevents manic episodes in people with bipolar illness, type 1 or type 2, doesn't matter. And because the concept of bipolar was only created in 1980, lithium studies began in the 1950s, there was 20, which included what we now call unipolar depression or major depressive disorder. And lithium was shown to prevent depressive episodes in unipolar depression. In fact, there was a meta-analysis some years ago that showed that lithium is equivalent or better than antidepressants for prevention of depressive episodes in unipolar depression. It does not need to be given adjunctively to antidepressants in unipolar depression, as people frequently say. It's proven to be effective by itself, both for the acute depressive episodes, but especially for prevention of depressive episodes in unipolar depression. So it is not a drug for mood illness, just for bipolar illness, but also for unipolar depression. And unlike standard serotonin reuptake inhibitors, lithium is proven to prevent depressive episodes long term. The SRIs lose their benefit at 6 months or longer, as we've talked about before. They do not prevent depressive episodes long term. They've been proven not to do so. They're equivalent to placebo after 6 months. In contrast, lithium prevents depressive episodes in unipolar depression. So here you have a drug that treats bipolar illness, acute mania, acute depression, and prevents depression as well as mania and bipolar illness, and treats acute unipolar depression, acute depression, and prevention of depression better than the standard antidepressants. And at low doses, treats mood temperaments like cyclothymia, hyperthymia, which people don't diagnose correctly, but is often misdiagnosed because of the effects of anxiety and poor attention as ADD and GAD. And at low doses, lithium treats that too. So the people you're diagnosing with kind of generic depression, anxiety, ADD often get better with lithium. By the way, there was once a study comparing lithium to an amphetamine for ADD, and lithium was equally effective just for ADD, diagnosed ADD. So you have a drug that works for anxiety, attention, depression, and mania, and prevents suicide and dementia at tiny doses and at low prescription doses where the vast majority of people have no side effects, and where even at standard doses, 95 to 99% of people don't have any long-term kidney or medical issues. Why are we not giving this drug more? Why are people uncomfortable with it? Why are clinicians and patients afraid of it? And I think the answer to that why question is because for the last 50 years, we have been overdosing lithium, and we have been following this false dogma that you have to get it to a therapeutic level of 0.8 or so. And that's based on very weak literature. Some years ago, I looked at that research and I was impressed at how weak it was. There's some evidence that that level is appropriate for acute mania. That's where the level might be relevant for a full-blown acute manic episode. But for depression, it's never been shown you need a level of 0.8. Not for bipolar depression or unipolar depression. It's never been shown that if you don't get a level of 0.8, you don't get better. For bipolar type 2 illness, it's never been shown you need a full level. Lower levels can be effective. And for maintenance prevention of mood episodes, the literature is really quite weak, and there's decent data that 0.6 can be fine for prevention of full-blown mood episodes in bipolar illness type 1. And it hasn't been shown that you need those doses for other kinds like type 2 or other versions of bipolar illness. And in unipolar depression, again, it's never been shown you need those full levels. In mood temperaments, there's some evidence that low dose lithium in the 300, 600 milligram range is all you need. There's no data that you have to have full levels. So this idea that you have to have full levels of lithium, full doses, is false. It's a false extension from old acute mania data to everything else. And that's why people get side effects, and that's why clinicians have been concerned about. Once you put that aside, you'll see that the patients will not have all those side effects, and that your concern is misplaced, that you should not be uncomfortable using lithium. Your discomfort should go away once you realize that lithium has a much broader range of applicability, and it can be given at lower doses than people tend to believe. One final comment, and then maybe we'll bring Daniel on for a little discussion. And that is that another thing that's worth saying to people is that lithium is a natural mineral. It is not a medication. It is not a synthetic drug created by a pharmaceutical company, by a chemical biologist. Lithium was created at the Big Bang by God or nature, whoever you want to give credit for it. It's the third element on the periodic table, hydrogen, helium, lithium. When those elements were created, they all came together. All that happened at the Big Bang. You can't add one iota of lithium to it or subtract. It is what it is in terms of what's out there in nature. The way you get lithium is you go to a lithium salt desert, like the Atacama Desert in Chile. You take a shovel and you pick it up off the ground. That's where lithium comes from. It's natural, like sodium, like salt, like chloride, like magnesium. And it's a part of our natural diet, like those minerals. So don't be afraid of lithium. Now, of course, natural minerals can be toxic if they're used at high doses, but lithium, that's the problem. People have been overdosing it. If you use it at low doses, it's quite safe and tolerable. And for whatever reason, mental illnesses exist, but nature and God, again, whoever you want to give the credit, created the cure at the beginning of the existence of our galaxy, and that's lithium. And we have it. We should start using it a lot more. So let me stop there and see if I can bring Daniel in and have a little discussion.
Alrighty. I just love this comment of bringing it back to the Big Bang and to the origin of the universe and the origin of the illness. Very nice, very poetic. I wanted to talk to you, though, about something that came to my mind. You talked about a lot of the possible complications of lithium treatment, but you didn't address completely the concern that I'm sure is on the back of the mind of a lot of clinicians, which is lithium intoxication. If you did for sure address that in terms of, well, if you use it in lower doses, then it's much safer. But there are some subpopulations that keep going back to my mind. Older patients who by nature already have a reduced renal function, patients who have a history of not eating so well or poor adherence to hydration and could get higher levels of lithium in that circumstance. And a third point, and I think that can be kind of like tying up to a next question, so I'll bundle them up, is a third population, which is population with a high risk of suicide by OD on tabs and pills. And we get into this weird situation where they have a very high indication for lithium since they're suicidal very often. They have tried attempted suicide multiple times, but a very high risk of intoxication and serious complication due to the use of lithium, since they will have lithium available and could overdose on that. So if you could comment on those sides of the matter, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. No, great points. Lithium prevents suicide at any dose. It could be 5 milligrams of lithium orotate over the counter. You could take 1,000 5-milligram lithium orotate pills. You're not going to kill yourself. But you could give 300 milligrams of lithium carbonate. That's plenty for suicide prevention. And if you give 30 pills of 300 milligrams, a month supply with refills, and you don't get the refill till you finish your 30 pills. You can't easily harm yourself with those 30 pills of 300 milligrams if you took them all at once. So the one answer to that is you don't need to be giving 900 milligrams of lithium and more and worrying about overdose with a high amount of lithium. You can give low doses for suicide prevention. Secondly, the good news is people will not overdose because they're taking lithium. It's going to be rare. If you give lithium and you're not giving antidepressants, which destabilize them at the same time, and amphetamines, just give them lithium, they will not be overdosing because they're not going to be suicidal. Lithium's been shown to decrease suicide by 90% in the randomized clinical trials. So it's going to be a very uncommon scenario. And again, you can give in low doses anyway if you're worried about that. I can tell you in my own personal clinical experience, I've been in practice for many years. I know I've had patients of mine who've committed suicide at least 5 or 6 times, either in treatment with me or afterwards. And in those 5 or 6 cases of suicide, not a single patient was on lithium. They died by suicide in other ways. It's easy to die by suicide if you want. You could go to Amazon and order helium and put it in a balloon and then inhale it, which is what one of my patients did. It's not hard. You can go online and find easy ways to die by suicide. I don't think you need to worry that the people are going to die by suicide with the pills that you're giving them, because they have so many other options these days. You can go over the counter to the store and get a big bottle of Tylenol. That's much more dangerous than 30 pills of 300 milligrams of lithium in terms of suicide. So that's not a rationale not to give lithium. In fact, again, give the lithium and you won't have to worry about the overdose because it just won't happen in the vast majority of cases. And by the way, those 5 or 6 cases I had in my career that died by suicide were earlier in my career when I wasn't using lithium much. In the last decade or so, where I've been using lithium more, I've had no overdoses with lithium, no suicide attempts with lithium. It just does not happen, basically, if you give people the drug. In terms of the other questions, general toxicity, if you take nonsteroidals with lithium, your levels may go up by 30% or so. That's nothing. If your level is 0.2, it goes to 0.3. If it's 0.4, it goes to 0.5. Again, as I said, the majority of people don't need full dose lithium. And even if you take a ton of nonsteroidal antidepressants, because your levels are going to be low, it's not going to have any negative impact. If you get very dehydrated, your levels could double. You go from 0.4 to 0.8. So what? It's still fine. The only problem is if you're at 0.8 or 1.0, then yeah, it could go to 1.6, 2.0, which could be borderline toxic. But I'm encouraging you not to give those levels. So again, if you use these low dose lithium levels, you don't need to worry about toxicity, even with dehydration in most cases. However, in older persons, it's different because as people age, and this is a very important point, the lithium doses and levels need to go down, not because, mainly because, the level you're taking of lithium is the level in the blood, and that's a proxy for what's in the brain. And in younger people, middle-aged people, the amount of lithium carbonate that gets in the brain is 1/2 of what's in the blood. So your level of 0.8 in the blood means 0.4 in the brain. But as people get older, into their 70s and later, the blood-brain barrier becomes porous and lithium gets in the brain more easily, and then it becomes more or less equal. So at age 75, the level of 0.4 in the blood is 0.4 in the brain, which is equivalent to 0.8 in a 30-year-old. So you have to essentially double in your head the lithium level in older persons, 70s and above, and that means you have to half the dose. So you don't, a full dose of lithium would be a level of 0.4 in a 75-year-old. A low dose of lithium is level 0.2, and that's where you need to stay. So basically, you need to give even lower doses in people at that age. And usually what I do is I don't give more than 300, 450 milligrams lithium maximum in anyone age 70s and above. And often I give 150 milligrams, or I give lithium orotate if I'm using it for neuroprotection. That way you don't have to worry about toxicity.
Awesome. Perfect. I think that addresses that pretty well. I think there are so many questions here on my mind that I'm having to pull myself and try to get a direction. I think it would be good to have a comment from you on the meta-analysis that kind of disproved or went against the idea that lithium was useful to prevent suicide when it was found in drinking water. I know you wrote a paper about that. I think it would be nice to have your spoken word about this too.
Yeah, the basic issue with that was that this is a group that opposes psychiatric drugs in general. They've opposed every class of psychiatric drug, and they had to go after lithium too. Their opposition is usually social and political, based on the idea that pharmaceutical companies are manipulating people. Lithium was not something they could criticize for that reason, because it's been generic from the very beginning. When it came to the US in 1970, it was actually never introduced and marketed primarily by pharmaceutical companies. It's the only drug for which that's the case. So they couldn't make the economic claim that people were being manipulated about lithium. They just went after it anyway, and that shows that they're just opposed to psychiatric drugs, period, not about the economic issues. And what they did is they took the randomized trials of lithium, and the way traditionally these studies are done is if there's an outcome of suicide, then those drug studies are included in the randomized trials. And there's about 5 or 6 or 7 studies that have outcomes of suicide, either in the lithium arm or the placebo arm. If you do meta-analysis of those 6 or 7 studies, you get a benefit of lithium reducing suicide rates by 80 to 90%, as I said earlier. And the study samples add up to about 800 to 1,000 patients or so. And you need those kind of numbers to be able to get, the statistical significance, because suicides are infrequent, especially in these clinical trials, because patients are pre-selected not to have suicidality to enter these clinical trials. So you might have 2, 3 suicides in one arm or another at most. So you have to add up 6 or 7 studies to get 10 or 20 suicides to get statistical significance out of 1,000 people. Now, what these researchers who hate psychiatric drugs did is they did a trick. And they must have known about this trick. There's no unconscious way you could do this. They added in all the other studies of lithium, dozens and dozens of studies where there were 0 suicides. No suicides in the lithium arm, no suicides in the placebo arm. And basically they watered down the results so that out of 1,000, you had 20 or 30 suicides out of 10,000. And that made the study statistically non-significant. The p-value became less than 0.05, just because if you have a large sample or fewer outcomes, you just lose your statistical power. And then they falsely stated, therefore, there's no effect. The effect was actually the same. They showed the same 60% or more. And when you look at it that way, reduction in suicide rates with lithium. Lithium did reduce suicide rates compared to placebo, even in their analysis. But because they included thousands of patients who had no outcomes, it reduced the statistical significance. And then they falsely claimed that the non-statistical significance meant there was no effect. It's a trick, a statistical trick by people who have an underlying agenda against psychiatric drugs. It's pseudoscience, as I described it in my paper, not science.
Perfect. Thanks for addressing that. And I think I'm going to ask one last question, and then we can go through the comments that a lot of people are sending comments here. But I wanted to ask for, in your clinical practice, when you have patients that do not meet criteria for the DSM bipolar disorder idea, but they have those generic MDD, GED, sometimes ADD, plus or minus, right? How would you explain the rationale for lithium in terms of MDI? How do you go about that conversation in those cases?
Well, I think you have to get out of the whole concept of bipolar illness and thinking about lithium for that. Lithium is effective in mood illness. It doesn't matter if it's mania or depression. It doesn't matter if it's manic symptoms or depressive symptoms. It's effective in mood illness. So bipolar illness and unipolar depression. So if you're using it for people that you're diagnosing with so-called major depressive disorder, lithium's effective for that. Give it to them. The only other thing to add in besides the bipolar and the unipolar depression is mood temperaments. So people with mood temperaments have manic symptoms all the time to a mild degree, hyperthymia, or up and down manic and depressive symptoms all the time to a mild degree, cyclothymia. If your mood is always a little manic or a little depressed, you're also often anxious or you can't focus. And then they get misdiagnosed with the effects as opposed to the cause, as having so-called attention deficit disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. And then they get drugs for those effects, amphetamines and benzodiazepines, instead of the cause, which is the mood temperament. Low-dose lithium takes the edge off the mood temperament, the anxiety and the attention gets better, and then they don't need the amphetamines and benzodiazepines and they do well. That's how I would explain it.
Perfect. All right. I think we can go through some comments. Remembering the quote that you used in the beginning of the episode. Who was the quote from? Do you remember?
Frederick Goodwin. Frederick Goodwin was the former director of the National Institute of Mental Health and the first author of a classic textbook, Manic Depressive Illness, the main textbook in the field. And he was my closest mentor.
So, Increasing Joy asked, do you still test TSH, UA, etc. at the same frequency with low dose lithium?
Thank you for asking that question. I didn't mention that. The frequency of testing, that's another thing that makes people uncomfortable. Don't worry about it. Don't test. If you don't want to test, don't. If you actually, I would like to say just don't test people, but I know people are going to say, all right, well, legal risks and so on. This is how I do it. When I start someone on 300 milligrams of lithium and then 450 and then maybe 600, wherever I stop, whenever I get to a dose where they're better, that's when I check the blood level. And I'm only checking it to document it, not because I care to get it to the false therapeutic concept. I'm only checking it just to know what it is. And mainly, I guess, to know that it's not toxic, which it usually won't be. But if for some reason, it was 1.2, 1.5 at a dose of 450, you'd want to know. It never happens, but check it for that. And then check the thyroid function tests when you get to that standard dose, just to see what it is. You don't need to check the thyroid function tests before you start lithium. It doesn't matter. Almost everybody's normal, and almost everybody gets testing anyway as part of their routine physicals. You don't have to check a baseline. Now, suppose 2-3 months later you check it and it's abnormal. You don't know whether the baseline was abnormal. Okay, you could, if you really care, stop your lithium, recheck it again in a month. But you don't have to put every single person through a huge hassle of getting testing before they start lithium. There's just no need for that. So I check it a few months into treatment whenever I get to whatever dose is effective for the patient. The other time I might check it earlier would be if there's a lot of side effects, but you want to keep them on the lithium and you're just wondering if the level might be high, you can check it then. But after you check it the one time, after they get to their dose that's effective for them, then you can check it again a few months later, 3 to 6 months later. There's no rush. Any time in there is fine. And then once they're on it long term, you check it every 6 to 12 months. You can check it once a year. That's fine. You don't need to do it more frequently. If you really want to be conscientious, check it every 6 months. But you don't need to do it much more than that. So that level of frequency of blood testing for lithium, people say, oh, it's a hassle. It's only a hassle because you're overdoing it, my clinician friends. Please stop testing the blood levels so much. Once or twice a year is enough. And that's not more of a hassle than going to see your regular primary care doctor for your routine physical.
Gotcha. Going on to Larry Wang. By the way, Larry, we really do appreciate you so much, your participation with the comments and questions. You're great, my friend. Keep them coming. So Larry asks, can you speak about the theory of lithium stabilizing circadian rhythm through mediation of clock genes?
Yeah, there's been research that's shown. So lithium has circadian rhythm effects too. Thanks, Larry, for pointing that out. Sometimes you give it to people and they sleep a lot better, which is interesting. Circadian rhythms are central to the pathogenesis of manic depressive illness. In mania, people's circadian rhythms are sped up, and in depression, they're slowed down. It's probably quite central to the development of the disease. There are animal models of bipolar illness where there's a gene called the clock gene, and you can create an animal model where the clock gene is knocked out. And when the clock gene isn't present, you have alternating cycles of hyperactivity and underactivity, which is seen as a model of bipolar illness. When you treat them with lithium, those clock gene knockout mice get better and the cycles of hyperactivity and underactivity improve. So lithium affects the clock gene, and it may be a mechanism by which it has its long-term disease-modifying benefits of preventing mood episodes.
All right. Can you keep it coming? Do you have time for a few more questions?
Sure. As much as we have is fine with me.
All right. So Michael Walker brings up about a new form of lithium being studied. Lithium plus amino acid proline and salicylate, I suppose.
Salicylate, yeah. There's a company, biotech company, that is looking at lithium, proline, salicylate. It's lithium connected to aspirin, essentially, salicylate and proline. And there's some basic research that shows that that version of lithium gets into the central nervous system more than lithium carbonate. By the way, there's also research that shows that over-the-counter lithium orotate gets into the central nervous system more than lithium carbonate. So the idea is with these other versions of lithium, you can give less and therefore have less systemic side effects because there's less lithium in the blood that's going to go to the kidney and the thyroid to get the benefits that you need in the brain. And the company that's studying lithium proline salicylate, which is actually patented, so it might come to the market from a company as opposed to being generic, they're looking at it for dementia prevention at low doses. So it is very interesting, and if it's proven effective, then it might be a way to give lithium even more safely at even lower doses. My claim is you can use lithium carbonate at low. You could also potentially have other formulations of lithium that get in the brain more easily, and then you could use those at low doses as well.
Larry sent another question. Thoughts about lithium's effect on longevity?
Yes, I've heard about that. I don't have a lot of knowledge of the details of some of the basis for it. Usually in the longevity research on different potential beneficial interventions tends to involve biological research showing lengthening of telomeres. Shortening of telomeres is associated with aging, so lengthening of telomeres is thought to be associated with longevity. There's probably some association of that with lithium, I would guess, but I'm not too familiar with it. Very low dose lithium, the kind that is used over the counter, potentially is the kind of usage that people might be thinking about for longevity. But again, I don't know much about it, and I obviously don't think it's been studied in humans too much. I will say one thing though. I said that lithium is the only drug that's been proven to prevent suicide. It's also been proven to reduce mortality in people with mood illness. And dementia, I mentioned, it's worth pointing out that people with mood illness have 2 to 4 times higher rates of dementia than the general population, very high rates. By the time they're in their late 60s and 70s, they have a 25% dementia rate, which is compared to 5% of the general population. So giving them lithium is highly important to prevent dementia, which improves obviously their quality of life, but also improves their medical morbidity and mortality, because dementia leads to a lot of medical diseases and death. So that's one mechanism that lithium might reduce mortality. Another place aspect that's been shown in epidemiological data is that there's reduced cardiovascular mortality on lithium. Unlike serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which do not reduce cardiovascular mortality, lithium does. And this may be for the, people think, of course, stress reduction, less depression, but it could also be some direct effects on the immune system. Lithium has beneficial cytokine effects. Maybe that has some benefits for cardiovascular mortality too. So, besides the generic longevity issue, we should say that in people with psychiatric illnesses, lithium keeps them alive, not just by suicide prevention, but by reducing death from common medical diseases like cardiovascular disease. And in fact, in some analyses, it's been suggested that people with mood illness who take lithium will have a 10-year longer lifespan. So that's another thing you potentially tell your patients. Take the lithium, not just because it prevents depression and mania for you, but it'll prevent you from having dementia, and it'll extend your life by about a decade.
Well, the solution was there all along, since the beginning of the universe. That's
right.
All right.
And I mean, like you said, that's almost like a spiritual concept, that the cure for mental illness was created when the universe began, or at least many mental illnesses.
It's poetic. Second PCO made a comment on lithium orotate, but I think you already shared a lot of that. MK is bringing again a concept that oftentimes you go through, but I think it's interesting to touch on this again, since we have many new people watching us today live. What's your opinion on the metabolic theory of general etiology of mental disorders and the mitochondrial effects of lithium treatment as a key to understanding its effectiveness?
That's an excellent question. I honestly don't have a clear response because I'd have to look at that literature and understand it better in terms of the mitochondrial effects of lithium. I know there's a lot of interest in mitochondria and their relevance to disease in general. There is a literature on mitochondrial genetics being relevant for bipolar illness. Some people there's some evidence potentially suggesting that the mitochondrial genes may actually be the most important, but that's not definitive. So I don't have a general comment that would be particularly enlightening probably to that question, but I do appreciate that it's an important issue and probably something we should look into more.
So they brought another comment just to give more context for this. It comes from Dr. Chris Palmer, who proposes the metabolic theory.
Dr. Palmer's metabolic theory. Okay. So this relates to some extent to, I guess, ideas about ketosis and ketogenic diets. There's definitely some reasonable nutritional literature on glucose and processed glucose being harmful, obviously for the body, but also for the brain, maybe predisposing to neurodegeneration, and maybe harming mood. So I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. How that plays out clinically, we still need to understand. But I would agree with the general concept of reducing sugar in the diet is probably beneficial for the body and the brain, and probably for one's mood.
All right, there's a few more questions here. When I brought it up, I think I was, with the context of the previous question, I was thinking of biological mechanisms and correlations and the philosophy of mind barriers kind of situation. This is why I gave the preamble to the question. But the Roblox Pro, I love the usernames for the questions. I've heard so many different numbers regarding risk of kidney issues per X years on lithium. What numbers do you quote patients?
Yeah, the numbers I quote is 1 to 5% at 20 years. So to drill down on that a little bit, it's 1% at 20 years. This is based on large Scandinavian databases where they have the entire country literature, medical records. So they can say everybody who got lithium in Norway, Sweden, Scandinavia, everybody's medical records who developed kidney impairment for their entire life. So if you take a look at all the people that got lithium, 1% of them at 20 years had chronic renal insufficiency. If you look at people who took lithium for 20 years, it was 5%. So the range is 1 to 5%. I mean, you're prescribing lithium now, you don't know if the patient's going to be on it 20 years from now, so you can say their risk is 1%. But you could say if they stay on it for 20 years, they might have a 5% risk. But again, full doses, multiple daily dosing. There are other studies, again, mostly from Scandinavia, looking at people who had lithium kidney impairment. They've done renal biopsies on them. They've looked at their histories, and these studies find that a major predictor of long-term kidney impairment is multiple daily dosing. So giving it once a day reduces the risk a good deal. Another point to make is that there are other studies that looked at kidney biopsies long-term and lithium treatment, and in one of the classic studies, 60% of the patients had no kidney effects at all. 60%, 60, with long-term kidney lithium treatment. The other 40% had some kidney effects. Most commonly, 30% or so had renal tubular effects that led to decreased concentration and capacity. That's what leads to people urinating more frequently. That's not harmful. It's not going to kill them. It's just an inconvenience that they urinate more frequently. It's only 5% or less that will actually have degeneration of the nephrons. So the point is, the 5% or less is what we care about. There's going to be maybe a third that will have some other kidney effects that are reversible and not harmful. But the other point is that 60%, the majority, have zero effects in their kidney. Kidney's actually fine, despite long-term treatment with lithium. So that's some of the detail on it. But again, the number I cite is 1 to 5% at 20 years or longer. And don't worry about that now. That's what I tell patients.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I think this is a good point to wrap up. Thanks, everyone who's watching from home, sending questions. We had a new record, over 50 people watching live.
Wow.
What a great honor. What a great pleasure to have this community talking about lithium, mood illness, and finding new or getting back to new old ways of seeing psychiatry, seeing mental illness, and talking about this medication who's been there since the beginning of time. Such a poetic kind of podcast episode. Thank you so much, Nasir. This was great.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you all for joining us today on the live stream. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.